Hello, Dinuba Presbyterian Church, and welcome back to our weekly online video Bible study about the chaos of the first century world, how Jesus responded to that chaos, and what it means for us in the 21st century world. I'm really grateful to be back with you all. We're doing something a little different today. We are in the church library, as you can see, instead of at Pastor Mark and Jenny's house, where we hams still are, as we wait to sell our house in Texas and find a house here. So I thought you might enjoy seeing this room, remembering what it looks like, and we can look forward together to the time when we can meet in person together when the pandemic is behind us. I'm really grateful for you studying with us. Please feel free to like and share this video, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss a study each week when the video arrives. So just like last week, let's briefly review. God sent his son Jesus into the world in a particularly chaotic time that we call the first century. There was political upheaval and violence and turmoil because the Roman Empire is occupying the land of the Jewish people and ruling over them. Now, understandably, the Jews want the Romans gone and their historic kingdom and their independent nationhood restored. But there are several different schools of thought as to how to go about accomplishing this. And we're taking a look at 4 of those approaches over these weeks. Last week we looked at the Pharisees, and this week we are looking at the Pharisees' political enemies, the Sadducees. Now, the Sadducees don't appear in the Gospels nearly as much as the Pharisees do. There's much less of a scriptural record of them. And they're not nearly as famous or infamous as the case may be. And there are historical reasons for that. But before we look at their depiction in the Gospels and in Acts, because they do appear in the book of Acts as well, it's a good idea to kind of explore who the Sadducees are, what motivates them, and what they believe. So our word for Sadducee comes to us from the Hebrew Zadokee, that is the descendants of Zadok the high priest. Now, Zadok appears many times in the books of history in the Old Testament, specifically 2 Samuel and 1 Kings. But Zadok's big claim to fame in the Bible is that he is the high priest when the first temple is complete. So he has the distinction of being the very first high priest to serve in the temple. He was an unwavering ally of King David, both during Absalom's rebellion and during Adonijah's attempt to usurp the throne from Solomon. David's family is kind of like an ancient reality television show. There's a lot of intrigue, there's a lot of infighting, there's just a lot going on, and there's a lot of disagreement about succession. So Zadok is always loyal to David and to David's wishes, which is why together with the prophet Nathan, he anoints David's son Solomon as king. And of course, it's during the reign of Solomon that the first temple, this great dream that David had to build, is complete, and Zadok begins to serve in it. So Zadok was the beginning of a great dynasty of high priests that lasted almost 800 years, which is just absolutely mind-boggling when you think about that. Especially when you consider that the dynasty survived the destruction of the first temple and the Babylonian exile and captivity, and of course the return to the land after that captivity. As you might expect, such longevity and survivability as an institution gave the Zadokite line of priests a lot of prestige, a lot of influence. They'd been around for a long time. They'd seen it all, and they were kind of a rock for the people. This was the family, the blood relations they could always count on to be sitting in that position as the high priest of the people of Israel. So they held on to this position. They held on to this dynasty of high priests until the Hasmonean Revolt. Now, you might remember that the Hasmonean Revolt got started about 150 years before Jesus was born, as the Jewish people rose up against the Greeks. And that revolt led to a very temporary independence for the nation of Israel, but there was constant civil war and infighting, which came to an end when Pompey the Great, the Roman general, came into the war, marched into Jerusalem, marched into the temple, and established Roman rule over the Jewish people, as we saw a few weeks ago. So during that civil war, the descendants of Zadok lost the high priesthood, and what rose in their place and rose to priestly power was a group of like-minded priests and religious thinkers who attached themselves to the legacy of Zadok, even though they weren't actually related to Zadok anymore. And they called themselves the Sadducees, or that's the word we have for them, because they were Zadoki, the ones who had attached themselves to Zadok's legacy. Now, so by the time Jesus is born and he begins his ministry, the Sadducees are the political enemies of the Pharisees. The Sadducees are the temple elite in Jerusalem, and they still have a lot of power over the affairs of the Jewish people. The high priest is a Sadducee in Jesus' time, and the Sanhedrin, that religious council in Jerusalem, is split between Pharisees and Sadducees. Though the Pharisees have a far more spiritual outlook than the Sadducees, it's really kind of akin to two rival political parties vying over wealth and power and popular reputation, which kind of sounds similar to our situation in the United States today with our two major political parties. So the Sadducees are determined to maintain that wealth and that power, and their ambition has eroded their faith. And they disagree with the Pharisees on two very crucial questions: messianic hope and resurrection. The Sadducees don't think that a powerful Messiah is going to come and rescue them and is going to change their reality and change what's going on in the world. And they also are not looking forward to the resurrection of the dead. They're not looking forward to that last day when God raises his people. And this is not just a mere academic argument that theologians have, and then they say, okay, that was a great argument, let's go out and have dinner together, let's go out and get a cup of coffee, whatever the equivalent of going and getting a cup of coffee was in first century Judea. But it's much, much more dynamic and much more caustic than that. As the Apostle Paul found out and really kind of cleverly exploited when he was brought before a council in Jerusalem in Acts 23. Now, when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply, "We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him?" And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from among them by force and bring him into the barracks. So this disagreement is so sharp and the Sadducees are so committed to this viewpoint that there is no resurrection, that there's an all-out bench-clearing, total brawl happening at this council. And who says the New Testament isn't exciting, right? So in short, the Sadducees no longer believe that God is really active in the world. They don't believe that God will save them in the present or raise them up in the life to come. Their present lifetime and its immediate concerns about money and power are all that they have. This leaves them with only one lens through which to view the problem of Rome, and that's the political lens. The Sadducees are the party of collaboration, seeking to find the best way to work with the Romans and secure their continued position as the elite group that's in charge of the temple. Their willingness to wheel and deal with the Gentiles and their commitment to maintaining a status quo around the temple that's not going to antagonize the Romans make them very unpopular in the eyes of the people, very much unlike the Sadducees, unlike the Pharisees. And this pushes the people toward the Pharisees and their point of view, as we saw last week. And of course, we know the Pharisees have their own sets of issues. Now, the only thing that the Pharisees and the Sadducees seem to agree on is that Jesus must be stopped. For the Pharisees, he must be stopped from reaching the impure and corrupting the people. For the Sadducees, Jesus must be stopped before his charisma and the power of his message turn the people against Rome and upset the Sadducees' political fortunes and the delicate balance that they've struck with the Roman Empire. So in the Gospels, Jesus has indirect confrontations with the Sadducees before he is brought to trial. Probably most famously, the discussion recorded in Matthew 23, in Mark 12, and Luke 20. These are all about the same thing, about the resurrection of the dead, when the Sadducees have this hypothetical question for Jesus about a woman who has husbands repeatedly die and marries the next brother in line and the next brother in line and the next brother in line. And their question, of course, is, to whom will she be married in the resurrection? But they ask this quite disingenuously because they do not believe in the resurrection. But Matthew and Luke both record Jesus offering a powerful rebuke of the Sadducees' philosophy. It happens right after Jesus is baptized by John, when he's led into the desert to be tempted. Luke's account is a bit more robust than Matthew's, so we'll pick that up right at the beginning of Luke chapter 4. And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing during those days. And when they were ended, he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread." And Jesus answered him, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone." And the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said to him, "To you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to whom I will. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." And Jesus answered him, "It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." And he took him to Jerusalem and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." And Jesus answered him, "It is said, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Now, in this passage, Jesus is offered supreme earthly political power. He's offered the opportunity to leverage military might, economic supremacy, and social pressure to achieve his ends, which his opponent presumes is the defeat of the Romans, their overthrow in Judea, and the restoration of Israel as a powerful kingdom and a dominating political force in the world. He is given a chance to grasp all of the power that the Sadducees dream of attaining, and in a single move he could reset the chaotic playing field of the first century and set him and his people up as undisputed rulers. The oppression of Rome would end. This new Israel would be glorious. But he doesn't take it. In fact, Jesus outright rejects the idea of seizing this power as being flagrantly disobedient to God. In this passage, the devil presents 3 different temptations to Jesus, and Jesus refutes and rebuts all 3 by quoting from the same part of the Old Testament, from the book of Deuteronomy. Remember that our chapter and verse divisions that we have in our Bible are an invention of the Middle Ages to help us study a bit more accurately and to help us find things a bit more quickly. It's a wonderful system, it's a great thing, but those chapter and verse divisions did not exist when Jesus was reading the Tanakh, when Jesus was reading the Old Testament. And so as he quotes from Deuteronomy 6 and Deuteronomy 8, he's really just quoting from the same central part of Scripture. So what's happening in that portion of Deuteronomy that Jesus is quoting when he is offered this political power? Well, this section is kind of a valedictory address, if you will, by Moses to the people of Israel just before they cross the Jordan and enter into the Promised Land. Now, for fans of American history and the musical Hamilton, this is kind of akin to George Washington's farewell address that he gave after his second term as president, in that there is a warning contained in it to the people. Moses tells the people that after they have settled in Canaan, they will enjoy great wealth and great power, and that this will cause them to drift away from the God who had rescued them from slavery in Egypt. They must remember to reject the temptation to use that power to serve themselves and their own interests, forgetting their God and focusing their minds and hearts on their present comfort and their present ambition. They must serve God only and nurture the faith that their ancestors will pass along to them, so that when future generations are born and they ask about their history and about God, they'll be able to answer. Moses presents a perspective beyond a single human lifetime that looks to a future in which God is present and active, very much as God is right now. And it's this perspective that Jesus relies upon when he faces very present trials and temptations in the wilderness after his baptism, and when he rejects ultimate earthly political power. Purely human politics is a tyranny of the temporal. It entraps all who pursue it in a cage that's only one lifetime big, because power is always temporary. Faith in God and obedience to God requires a perspective that's beyond a single human lifetime, because we look not only ahead to future generations, just as Moses' words in Deuteronomy do, but we also look to the life to come. But the Sadducees do not believe in this resurrection. They don't believe in this life to come. They don't have a goal beyond the confines of a single human lifetime to work toward, and their foresight can only reach as far as the temporal. And so they cease becoming spiritual actors, and they become purely political actors. And politics in the first century world is dominated by Rome. The Sadducees' obsession with temporary political power only adds fuel to the chaotic fire of the first century. Jesus offers a completely different perspective, not just in theory, not just academically, but in reality, when he is raised from the dead and when he begins the great work of saving, renewing, and raising us to new life as well. This was a vital message in the first century, and a very timely message for us in our 21st century as well. So thank you again for studying with us. Next week, we're going to turn our attention to a lesser-known group within the Jewish community called the Essenes, and I hope you will join us then. The Lord bless you this week, and we'll see you next time.